Chapter 25. Vestige of the Kingdom. Lift up your hearts and be glad, for I am in your midst, and am your advocate with the Father, and it is his good will to give you the kingdom. D&C 19:5. After Jesus and others ordained men to be kings, then what? Was there some kind of organization, quorum or council to which they could belong? They shouldn't be expected to just wander off with the title of king, and not have any further affiliation with others holding the same title. Within the Catholic Church there are still a few rudiments from the original Church of Christ, but many practices and doctrines have been lost along its 2,000-year historical path. We wonder, how far along this path did the concept of kings and queens originate? One early and interesting account of kings comes from King Arthur. Historians have been chasing the story of King Arthur for many years, thus bringing to light considerable history and a variety of legends. Today it is difficult to separate true legend from glowing fiction. After the 12th century, the portrayal of King Arthur began to include new stories, legends and myths, and some were so bizarre and unbelievable, they caused many facts to then be considered as fiction. This seems to be common with many historical events. The first writer consciously to draw on the still largely oral sources pertaining to Arthur was a 12th century historian named Geoffrey of Monmouth. It was created a vehicle for the seemingly inexhaustible supply of stories concerning the exploits of Arthur and his heroes by writing a history of the kings of Britain. The Arthurian tradition, John Matthews, page 3. Historians, however, continually uncover material that tends to verify the actual existence of this venerable king. They have found the story repeated in the writings of a 9th century Welsh monk named Nennius. Before that, he was mentioned in a book, Life of Saint Columba, in the 7th century, and in a Celtic poem Gododin written about 600 AD. His story goes back far enough that it could even be an idea that survived from something originated by Christ himself. This story of King Arthur, coming from the Middle Ages, has many of the earmarks of being a remnant of the kingdom of God. It is based on the life of a wise and honorable man who fit the mold as being someone who honored the kingdom of God. He was a Christian king. He had a kingdom and revered God as his personal and supreme king over his own kingdom. His friend Merlin was a spiritual advisor, much the same as a prophet would be. Arthur, however, became obsessed with Roman Christianity, to the extent that he began to regard his Gallic cavalry as a holy army. This disposition led to considerable disturbance within the Celtic Church, for Arthur was, after all, destined to be the next King of Scots. Bloodlines of the Holy Grail, Lawrence Gardner, page 148. Some old records indicate that Arthur had 3 wives, however, Lawrence Gardner admitted to only 2. He related that Arthur was married to Gwenhwyfar of Brittany, but she bore him no children. On the other hand, he did father Modred by Morgane. Ibid. Page 151. King Arthur died in 603 AD. Several hundred years later, 1191 AD, an important discovery was made when some monks at Glastonbury discovered the remains of King Arthur. The story was related by Gardner, some 16 feet, c. 4.8 meters, below ground in a hollowed oak canoe. They unearthed the bones of a tall man, along with some smaller bones, and a tress of golden hair. Such a find was of little consequence in its own right, but the monks were in luck, for not far above the log coffin there was said to have been a leaden cross embedded in stone. Upon a cross was inscribed Hic lacet sepultus inclutus rex Arthurius in insula Avalonia cum uxor sua secunda Guinevere. Here lies interred the renowned King Arthur in the Isle of Avalon, with his second wife Guinevere. Not only had they found Arthur's grave, but they had also conveniently found written proof that Glastonbury was the Isle of Avalon. However, the Roman Church officials were far from happy that Guinevere was described as the king's second wife, and it was asserted that the inscription was obviously incorrect. This posed something of an immediate problem, but soon afterwards the legend reappeared, miraculously changed in spelling and format. This time it dispensed with Guinevere altogether, so that it was far more in keeping with requirement. Hic lacet sepultus inclutus rex Arturius in insula Avalonia. Here lies interred the renowned King Arthur in the Isle of Avalon. Ibid. Pages 154 to 155. The much-loved story of King Arthur is familiar to readers worldwide, but to Mormon historians, there are items of particular interest, the most fascinating being the number of knights that were supposed to be seated at the Round Table. It is recorded that these were men of the most prowess and worship to fill at least 50 of the seats. Sir Thomas Malory in La Morte d'Arthur, as quoted by John Matthews in the Arthurian tradition, page 28. The legend of King Arthur is one of an honorable king who left behind the beautiful story of Camelot. Fact or fiction? It doesn't really matter here. because it revives the spirit and inspiration of a magnificent kingdom. Yes, the king is dead, but his legend lingers on. In our imagination we still like to picture such a great king, glorious queen, and honorable knights of the Round Table. The glorious vision of Camelot has not passed away. Most people dream of living in a kingdom where there is no evil or temptation, and they can bask in the sunshine of love and happiness forever. However, these do not need to be impossible dreams, as ancient prophecies mention that this condition will someday become a reality, and God has promised an even better kingdom eventually. It is recorded that alongside King Arthur's body lay his sword, the weapon he used to fight so valiantly for the peace and freedom of his kingdom. King Arthur's sword had a special significance, and can be compared to another sword described by Brigham Young. When Joseph Smith got the plates, the angel instructed him to carry them back to the hill Cumorah, which he did. Oliver says that when Joseph and Oliver went there, the hill opened, and they walked into a cave, in which there was a large and spacious room. He says he did not think, at the time, whether they had the light of the sun or artificial light, but that it was just as light as day. They laid the plates on a table. It was a large table that stood in the room. Under this table there was a pile of plates as much as 2 feet high, and there were altogether in this room more plates than probably many wagon loads. They were piled up in the corners and along the walls. The first time they went there the sword of Laban hung upon the wall, but when they went again, it had been taken down and laid upon the table across the gold plates. It was unsheathed, and on it was written these words: "This sword will never be sheathed again, until the kingdoms of this world become the kingdom of our God and his Christ." J.D. 1938. It is with great interest we learn that as time goes on, adding new chapters, discoveries from the past also continue to reveal new historical facts. There continue to be archaeological discoveries revealing many important finds. Who knows what swords, metal plates, coins, records, and artifacts may yet be discovered and restored. And even greater than these will be the restoration of that elusive but promised kingdom of God.